we realize the extent of the myriad of interconnections which link us to all other life, we realize that our existence only becomes meaningful through interaction with and in relation to others. That's what this is about. That's what this movement is about. Gandhi said, "You must be the change you want to see in the world." I live by that. And I think our youth in this movement are living by that. I think the community has gotten engaged and now recognizes, if you want to see TUSD integrated, if you want to see MOS reinstated, you cannot sit back. You have to be the change that you want to see. And let me change the motto a little bit. In TUSD. We have been able to engage people through forums like this. And I really appreciate the work that's being done to get the community out. The Dalai Lama said, "Our ancient experience confirms at every point that everything is linked together. Everything is inseparable." And Einstein, a physicist, scientist, said, when forced to summarize the general theory of relativity to one sentence, time and space and gravitation have no separate existence. For matter, what does this have to do with desegregation? We are all connected, and some people just don't want to face that truth. They don't want to accept the fact that we are all connected. These next two slides are very impressive to me because there was a connection between Martin Luther King and Chavez, and they really never talked together, but they talked. What is needed is a realization that power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic, Martin Luther King said. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. And I wrote myself a note. Power to, not the power over. This movement is about the power to change, not the power over people. What we are resisting, what we are fighting, is people that have had power over, or have assumed that they had power over. People that thought they had the power over taking MOS away from our children. Real power is power about to change, to move, to empower. So there's a real misunderstanding about what power is at the government level, at our state level, by our governing board members. The power here, power to change, is the real power. I won't read you this prayer, but this is so connected to what MLK said. And what Chavez said was, basically, you have to love those who hate. Those that oppress, you have to forgive and you have to love. Because love does what? It empowers. And if we're going to change things, it has to be from that place. That's what empowerment is all about. And some of you are wondering, when is she going to get to desegregation? Everyone here in some way is connected to the issue surrounding legitimate equality for Chicano students. Substantive desegregation in TUSD is foundational to the equality that all students are entitled to public education. All students. Not some. Our system is a dual system still in 2012. And it has to change. Mexican-American Studies. The attack on MAS, its teachers, its director, Sean, and he took the bullet more than anybody in the movement. Its students, its books, its community is symptomatic of the biased anti-Mexican, Mexicana epidemic, which is spread like cancer in Arizona, in Tucson, and in our school system, TUSD. In many ways, MAS is the symbol for claiming what is ours. It's ours. It's our history. There are books. It's our culture. It's our language. It's our music. It's our origins. You can't take those things away. For those of you that don't know, 60% of the kids in TUSD are Latino. And the argument is being made by some in the district that say, how can you have a deseg order in place when the majority of the kids are now minority? And that is because there is still a dual system, and minority kids, as you will see and we will discuss, are still getting the short end of the stick. I love beginning my talks talking about inspiration. It's almost the beginning of the school year. And when I see this kid up here, what he has is brightness in his eyes. You ever seen kindergartners or first graders on the first day of school? Their eyes are filled with light and joy. They have their backpack, they have their books, they have their crayons. Their mom or dad have taken them to the store, they have new clothes. They're so excited about doing what? I'm going to learn. I'm going to learn. I'm going to learn my colors. I'm going to learn my shapes. I'm going to learn how to read. I'm going to learn how to add, how to subtract. Every kid, it doesn't matter from what neighborhood in this city, every kid comes to town, to school that way. No matter what town, no matter what city, no matter how small, no matter how big. That's what happens. Some of us keep that brightness in our eyes. Certainly, Nico has kept it. Certainly, Sean has kept it. And Sean, don't let them ever take it away. Look at our maestro. He has kept it. Look at Sally. She has kept it. So some of us keep it. But unfortunately, the system kills that brightness in kids' eyes. And by third grade, they start forecasting room in the prisons for the percentage of kids in third grade. And we start, as institutionalists, predicting how many kids are going to drop out. And we plan enrollment based on failure. You know, when we do our demographics, we know who's going to fail. We know who's going to end up in prison. Inspiration also comes from things that are not working. This little kid is getting wanded at the TUSD governing board meeting. You know, this little kid is innocent, doesn't have weapons, doesn't have anything that's going to hurt anybody. But from the time that MAS became an issue in TUSD, and kids and parents and teachers started showing up to protest, the reaction was to have 30 or so officers at every meeting. It's become a military state down at TUSD. So our inspiration not only comes from those things that we love, but those things that are not working. This inspires me to do something to get rid of it. This inspires me. What's not working with TUSD? Teachers have to hold a press conference to hold on to their classes, to hold on to their books, to stand up for their kids. Kids have to march from Choya to 1010. And Mexican-American studies is not the only issue. There have been school closures threatened on our schools, on the west side, on the southwest side. This is a kid at Ochoa holding up the banner. Keep my school open. Save Ochoa School. We're all connected. And the way that we move forward is to honor our place in that, and our unity to one another in getting the movement going and changing things. Many people talk about history. I'm going to talk to you about herstory tonight. Let me tell you about my herstory, personal and professional. I started TUSD in 1956. I could not speak not one word of English. Ni una palabra. I was timed out, I was timed out, and I was timed out. I wasn't in 1C. I went to Roscridge. Most of the kids in my class spoke English. So at Roscridge, on the back side of Roscridge, not the 6th Street side, the other side, not the 5th Street side. On the other side, there's a stair with tile, and one of the tiles is indented. And it's from my navitas. I sat there most of the 1st grade. So, as you can see, I had very skinny legs. I was a little kid. So what they decided in 1st grade, Mrs. Frampton, who was kind, what she decided is if I was isolated, somehow I was going to learn English. Then she decided that wasn't working very well. So we're going to send Sylvia downstairs to the special ed class, which was totally segregated, and she'll learn English down there. How much English do you think I learned down in special ed? Not very much. And then she decided that because I was skinny and Mexican, that I probably was malnourished. So every single day I had to go to the cafeteria and drink milk. I was not malnourished, just skinny. At the end of 1st grade, Mrs. Frampton decided that she was going to retain me. My mother said no. And I made decisions at the end of 1st grade that impacted the rest of my life. I became a special ed teacher. I became a bilingual ed resource, bilingual special ed teacher. I am very involved in what to do and not to do in terms of discipline for children because of what happens to them for the rest of their lives. And things as a child that really formed me were my family values. My family would sit around in the morning drinking coffee, talking about politics. There was never a day that we did not know what was going on, Spanish or English. My friends, my family, the Cold War, my teachers, Mr. McIntosh and Mr. Harper, who acknowledged that I actually was bright and could learn how to do certain things. So all these things have kind of made me the person that I am. That begins in kindergarten now. For me, it began in 1st grade in terms of education. Let me tell you my perspective as I get into deseg, where it's come from. I taught in TUSD for 9 years, in Nogales for 1 year. I was TUSD's first civil rights compliance officer for 4 years. Then I decided that wasn't good enough. Couldn't change policy fast enough. So I sat on the governing board for 4 years. During that 4 years was the only time that the governing board ever discussed desegregation in a positive manner, I believe. We went on desegregation summit for 2 days, for a 2-day retreat, and started actually developing a desegregation plan. It went unfinished because I was a one-term board member. I was very involved in keeping Catalina High School open, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. And I during that court hearing, provided expert testimony as a civil rights expert. I served on the Independent Citizens Committee. I served on the Post-Unitary Status Committee, and I was a parent of a DSEG student. My daughter went to DSEG schools, that's what they used to call them. She went to Borden and Tucson High. And I've been the Mendoza plaintiffs representative since 2004. Interestingly enough, I thought it was going to be kind of an easy thing for me to do. And since 2004, this has become a voluntary career for me. I spent between 30 to 60 hours a week on this job. I work with the plaintiffs. I communicate with them regularly. I don't just decide what I'm going to do. I am their representative. I talk with Mary Mendoza and with Eddie Contreras. And I do nothing without them knowing what I am doing. I work very closely with legal counsel, and we have a phenomenal team. Nancy Ramirez, Lois Thompson, who is pro bono, and Dr. Nicholas, who is an expert in second language acquisition, and she's also been a special master on desegregation cases. And I communicate as much as I can with community. So my historical context is framed in both my personal life and my professional life. I couldn't do what I do without my personal nor without my professional. They kind of become connected. Now I have to tell you what I can't do. The last order that we got from the judge was telling the parties, and I'm involved as one of the parties, that we cannot discuss anything having to do with what's going on with the current plan. So as we get to questions later, I won't be able to address anything that's going on with the current plan. A, I don't want to be sanctioned by the court. B, I don't want to have to pay a fee. And 3, I don't want to be discredited. So I'm just not going to go there. What is desegregation? You know, we kind of think we have an idea. What is it? What does it look like? Well, it has a lot to do with ethnicity and race. It has a lot to do with how balanced a school is, ethnically, racially. It has a lot to do with how ethnically or racially balanced a whole school district is. Okay, now remember, the stipulation of settlement started in 1978. Tucson has changed significantly, racially and ethnically. So that's part of what a DSEG plan, order is all about, is ethnic and racial balance. The court does not want to see districts segregating its students. It doesn't want to see racially or ethnically isolated schools. It doesn't want to see segregation within a school. Why? Well, we have discovered through a lot of research that the more heterogeneous a school is, the more heterogeneous a classroom is, what happens to the kids? The better they do. So it's better for kids to be in an integrated setting. Kids who speak only Spanish learn English much faster if they are in a class with kids who speak English, which doesn't make any sense since our state law says kids are only together for 4 hours a day if you speak Spanish. So you're together for 4 hours a day speaking Spanish, because kids whisper back and forth, and you're not with English speakers. Does not make educational sense. And this is right here a lot of the heart of deseg. Of course it's integration, but it deals with a lot of what I call indicators. Is there equal access to the curriculum across the district? Is there equal access to extracurricular activities? Is there equal access to all the programs that are offered in TUSD? Or is there disparity? And that's a word that you're going to hear a lot. Disparity means that there's a significant difference between what this one is getting and this one is getting, or in the outcome. Okay? So, let me tell you about TUSD for as long as I have known about TUSD, and that goes back a long ways. David?
Quick question. So, a lot of people sometimes ask me about what does segregation mean. So, there's a lot of, people live in different parts of town, so it's natural to have, like I say, Pueblo, that 95% minority. So it's more than just like 50-50. It's more than it's a lot more than just the racial makeup also, right? It's like there's actually a difference in the
Well, because of the way that our neighborhoods exist in Tucson, there are going to be schools that are racially isolated. I'm a believer in still making every effort possible to integrate those schools. But the more slanted the district gets, the more difficult that is going to become. But there are different ways of integrating schools. One way is socioeconomic status. If you have higher socioeconomic Latinos attending school with lower socioeconomic kids, Latinos, it still is a balance. There's still exposure to a difference. Socioeconomic status is a big factor in integration. We are going to end up with racially isolated schools, but it's critical that we recognize that if those schools have needs that are different than schools that are in neighborhoods that are very wealthy, then it is the job of the school system to somehow balance, to provide educational services based on the needs of those schools. So does disparity exist? How long has it existed? Yes, I'm going to tell you right now, disparity absolutely exists in TUSD. There is significant statistical disparity between looking at Latino kids who are in GATE programs in contrast to non-minority kids who are in GATE programs. Advanced placement, the same thing. University high, the same thing. Those are all the positives. That's what I call the positives. And then you get into perhaps the negatives. There's an over-representation of Latino kids who get disciplined. And you may have the same infraction, exactly the same infraction. And one kid will get a 3-day suspension and another kid will get a 6-day suspension. And if you look at the racial ethnic breakdown, it's African Americans and Latinos who are getting the harsher punishments para la misma cosa, for the same thing. That's disparity. Special ed, there has been disparity, significant disparity of Latino kids in special ed programs. And right now, I can't speak to that. In another month or two, I will be able to speak to that. But consistently for years, that has been the case. Are facilities comparable? How many portables are in any building? Because portables are not buildings. Are there more portables on the west side or on the south side? What kind of renovations have been done to the buildings? Are the renovations equal? How many swamp coolers do you have in buildings? Where are those swamp coolers compared to the buildings on the east side? So there are comparisons across the board on these indicators. And I'm telling you right now that consistently for years and years and years, decades and decades, the disparity has existed. And what is tragic is that in 2012, they still exist. Digital access. If minority kids don't have the same access to computers, the same training, the same capability to practice, they're going to be out of the loop. Digital access is critical. So how has all this stuff been monitored? Because if you ask the district at any point during the deseg order how they were doing, what do you think they said? Great! We're in full compliance. We're working in good faith. We're doing right by kids. We're doing as much as the resources will allow. Well, in 1978, the stipulation of settlement created as part of the stipulation an independent citizens committee. And it had between 12 and 15 people on the committee. And it was comprised of people throughout TUSD. And luckily, there was always a Fisher representative. So the Fisher plaintiffs always had one person on that committee. And the Mendoza plaintiffs always had one person on that committee. And that committee was obligated to provide a report to the governing board once a year on the compliance of the deseg progress being made for TUSD. I want you to remember this, okay? Remember this. One of my inspirations was a little girl by the name of Sylvia Mendez. And my mother told me about her. And she told me about her and said, you have the same name as a little girl that's made history in California. Her parents, and it was her father, her parents, her father, and a group of other parents sued the school districts that they were attending because they were segregated based on ethnicity. Mexicans were trapped and they were segregated. This was really the landmark case for desegregation. How many of you have ever heard about it? Not a whole lot of publicity on this. This was the landmark case for desegregation. It was decided 7 years before Brown versus the Board of Education, and it was argued on appeal by Thurgood Marshall of the NAACP, who later also took on the case in Brown versus Board of Education. Many of the attorneys that worked on this went on to Brown versus Board of Education. This was their practice case. Here's the difference. The Ninth Circuit ruled on this, upheld the judge's ruling, and the schools in California, the ones that were involved in this lawsuit, had to desegregate their schools. It didn't go to the Supreme Court, like Brown versus Board of Education. That's why we didn't hear about it. This was the landmark case. Now, what happened before 1978? How many of you have heard about Dunbar? TUSD's segregated school for African American kids. and was segregated into early 50s. In the early 70s, a lot of cases were being filed with the Office for Civil Rights. A lot of them had to do with English language learners. Back then, kids were called limited English proficient students. There were a lot of complaints filed having to do with special ed. And that is where I really started my work in desegregation, because I was a special ed teacher. And I was a special ed teacher. Back then, I would get anybody and everybody that was considered special ed. But I kept getting these little kids in my classroom. They couldn't speak Spanish. I mean, couldn't speak English. They only spoke Spanish. But they were not mentally handicapped. I'd get African American kids in my classes that had black dialect, and they were labeled speech impediment, emotionally disturbed, and they were not. They were being misplaced. Now, back in the early 70s, mid-70s, TUSD was kind of a cool place. A teacher could speak up on behalf of her kids and not get into trouble for it. A teacher could say, this is wrong, this is discrimination, to the director of special ed. And that director would say, let's form a task force, let's fix this. So that's what happened back then. Instead of non-renewal of contract, much like what happened to Sean for speaking up on behalf of kids, people used to help us fix problems. And then in 1974, the NAACP took on the case for Josie and Roy Fisher, which began the lawsuit, the desegregation lawsuit. In 1974, Maria Mendoza, Teresa Portillo, and Alberto Sanchez joined. And then in 75, there was a connectedness. They were joint. They were consolidated. In 1977, most of the counts in the desegregation lawsuit were dismissed. But many of them, tri-ethnic segregated system was distinguished as part of the lawsuit that remained. The employment issues, the district tried to get rid of. But later, as the court reviewed those things under the deseg order, they found that they really were part of the whole case. In 1978, Judge Fry approved the first student assignment plan. And there was a lot of commotion over this because kids were getting bused from school to school, and much of it was making parents very unhappy. And who do you think most of the kids were that were getting bused? Minority kids. That was forced busing. And it involved, at the beginning, about 900 students. In 1979, the magnet plan was put together, and it was tried at Borden Elementary. That was one of the very, very first magnets. And it was aimed to equalize racial makeup. So what did Borden do? Borden is one of the very first magnets, along with the other magnets, Davis, Dragnet, Varillo, set up programs that were going to attract white students to those schools. So they had to offer things that were very unique. And one of the very unique things was after-school care for the kids. They had all kinds of innovative programs for after-school care. But it wasn't babysitting. It was very educational. So this was great for working parents. The schools filled up with kids, and the schools were integrated. And we always refer to those schools as deseg schools. In 1981, Davis Elementary was reborn as Davis Bilingual Magnet. And they had to learn how to speak English and Spanish. You had Latino kids and you had white kids speaking in both languages. It was a national model. And then in 1993, there was a critical decision that took place. And leading up to that decision was much like what has happened with Moss, except it was Catalina High School. It was an entire school. Some board members at that time decided that they wanted to build a new school on the southwest side of Tucson. And as I looked, I was on the board at the time. As I looked at the numbers, I could not make the numbers add up to requiring a new high school. And you know how expensive high schools are. I could not legitimatize building a new school, having new boundaries for the very few number of kids that were going to be going to this new school. But in order to afford this new school on the southwest side of town, the only way that the district would be able to afford it is if they closed one of their schools, one of their high schools. So the majority of the board decided that they were going to close Catalina High School. That was in the middle of town. The facility was getting old. They didn't really want to remodel it. They didn't want to invest into the school. So off they went, the majority of the board, in making effort to close the school. Catalina High School at that time was the most ethnically, racially balanced high school in TUSD. It was about 50-50. So under a deseg order, to close a school that is your most ethnically, racially balanced school in the entire district high school is contrary to what you would hope desegregation is about. It wound up in court. The judge ruled in favor of keeping Catalina open, and much of that was based on what the parents, the teachers, the administrator, and a former school board member contributed to that trial. Because the judge said, how can TUSD close its most ethnically, racially balanced school, A, and forsake it while building a school on the southwest side of town, which is going to be what? Racially isolated and not in need based on the numbers. This changed the entire deseg order because up until that point, high schools were not included in the deseg order. The only schools that were included were K through 8. So now all of the high schools were included in the deseg order. That's critical to Mexican American studies because if it hadn't been for Catalina, Moss would not have been under the court order. So that's why it's so important. Follow the money, I always say. Follow the money. In millions. In 1984, the district was spending $2.27 million on desegregation. And I'm not going to read this to you, just chase to the bottom. We are now at almost $63 million in desegregation.
Is this the money they got from the feds just for this?
Part of this
Combination.
Was from deseg funding from the feds at the beginning, but in, I think I put it up here. In 1984-85, we get levied as taxpayers in the district. We are levied for the deseg DSEG dollars. So DSEG dollars come out of local taxpayers' pockets. That is why, this is another connection, our pocketbooks are connected to DSEG. That's why it is our DSEG order. We're funding it. Has there been accountability? Is it transparent? Do we know where the heck that money has gone? No. And it's not because people have been silent, because every single year, including the judge, has demanded accountability and transparency. TUSD has shown, and by now, this is not going to be a great surprise to you. Every report that was filed by the Independent Citizens Committee, every single report, showed some elements of noncompliance, some elements of concern. And as we went from 1978 to the mid-80s, to the 90s, on and on and on, it seems that the noncompliance got worse, not better. 29 years of ICC reports. Remember I told you to remember that? That's critical. Even the district's own auditor, they paid someone in 1995 to come in and do an audit of the desegregation status, 1994-95. Even that report showed disparity in all of those indicators that we reviewed. Special ed, GATE, advanced placement, discipline, all of those areas in a report paid for by TUSD. Now, let me tell you what happened to that report. That report was commissioned by legal counsel in the district. So here's legal counsel. They have the contract with the consultant to do this report. They consider it a legal work product. They bury it. They bury it. Okay, now this report is about our kids. You know, this report is not about asphalt. It's about our kids. They bury it. ICC members, I was not on the ICC then, ICC members demand to see the report. How can they monitor compliance if they can't see the report? So the attorneys say, yes, you can see the report. One at a time. We will put you in this office, you can read the report, you cannot take notes, and you cannot share whatever you read in that report with one another.
Why? What was that about?
Well, they didn't want the ICC members going out and telling the public.
Well, obviously, yeah, but why did we do that?
Let me go back to the ICC. The ICC did not have independent legal counsel. Okay, which I always said from the get-go that there was a conflict of interest in having the legal counsel for TUSD giving advice to the Independent Citizens Committee. Because legal counsel for TUSD is always going to protect its client. So for 15 years, the audit was buried. In 2004, MALDEF unburied the report. And just before the judge was going to order that it be issued as a public document, TUSD voluntarily gave it up. What that report did is it validated 29 years of ICC reports. See, there's a connection. The ICC was this layperson's committee that was treated as though they didn't know very much. Yet every single thing that they said in their reports, 29 years of reports, was validated by these highly paid consultants. These two pieces of information are critical, because if it had not been for these two pieces of information and a lot of good work by MALDEF, we would not have won in the Ninth Circuit. But what's interesting about this is that even Judge Burry at the district court used all of the ICC reports, and I'll tell you how he did that, and the 1995 report to show that the district had not worked in good faith effort and had not been compliant with the DSEG order. Now, even though he said that in his court order, Judge Burry in 2007, 2008 granted TUSD unitary status. Unitary status means that that the district is, for all practical purposes, desegregated, and that there are no indicators of disparity. That's what it means. Okay, so MALDEF and the Fisher attorney, MALDEF, before the ink had even dried from that order, appealed that order with the Ninth Circuit. And there are volumes and volumes and volumes of documents that went to the Ninth Circuit proving what? The disparity did exist, bottom line, and that the school district still had vestiges of discrimination. Unitary status really means no more vestiges of discrimination, no more vestiges of segregation.
Sylvia, can you go back to the slide that showed the money? Back to the money slide. And how did it go from 2 million to 62 million? What's the process?
Well, until 84, 85, it was ESA funds, it was grants, DSEG funds. The district would apply for desegregation dollars from the federal government. And
it looks like a moneymaker.
Well, it is. It was a cash cow. In 84, 85, just prior to that, legislation changed so that all districts in Arizona that were under a DSEG order were able to go through their community without asking their community, but levy their community for taxes to pay for the DSEG. The school board would approve increases to the DSEG budget. So you can imagine, you know, from 84 on, so from here on, the governing board would approve increases. Now, you know, I have no problem with this at all, because we are one of the worst funded school systems in Arizona, in the entire nation as far as public education. And if you've got a good DSEG order and if you've got a good plan, you can perform miracles with this kind of money if you put it to use where the kids are. So it's not really that we're being taxed. It's not really that this is a, you know, horrible thing. This is actually, in my viewpoint, a good thing. It's not a good thing when the money disappears. It's not a good thing when it can't be accounted for. It's not a good thing, I'll tell a quick story and then I'll take your question. It's not a good thing when a teacher from Vail Middle School tells me, I love DSEG money. They're paying for my after-school chess club. And I say to her, that's great. Are you integrating the chess club? Are there white kids, black kids, brown kids? You know, what are you doing? She goes, what are you talking about? So DSEG dollars have gone into pots that have nothing to do with desegregation, and that's what I resent. As a taxpayer, as a parent, as someone that really understands how DSEG should work. So it's not that I have a problem with the dollars, it's I have a problem with no accountability.
One question. So in recent news, we're talking about DSEG money and PE at Holiday.
Holiday.
Is there a justification for using DSEG money on PE?
There could be, and you know, I can imagine an argument could be made, but if the shift is going to be more academic, if the shift is going to be something else, then that may not hold up anymore. At one point that held up. Since I can't talk about where the plan is going, I don't know right now. You had a question.
It's not a question. I just remembered that last week or the week before they told us here that somewhere between $750,000 and $900, somewhere in that area, was spent for security cameras on buses.
Out of DSEG dollars.
Yeah, out
Yeah.
of DSEG dollars.
So when I say no accountability and when I say no transparency, it's been the cash cow.
So these people seem to want it both ways. They want to make this a bad thing, and then they want to milk it too.
The good thing is, and I'm getting to the good thing, but let's take some more questions.
I was recently at the budget meeting and the emergency one that was held on Saturday morning, and they were talking about they have the budget out on the web, on the website, blah blah blah. And it's just like a short version because it would be too complicated for a regular folk to understand. So I guess my question is, if I specifically went to that their CEO or whatever he's called, or CFO, and I said I want to see specifically the spreadsheets on where the DSEG money went as a citizen, could I do that?
You could. You'd probably have to do it through the Freedom of Information Act, and you'd probably get something. My something would be I want an itemized list. And that's what the Independent Citizens Committee asked for year after year after year after year. I want to see the itemized list for every dollar of DSEG. And it shouldn't be that complicated. And the reason I want to see that, quick story, and then I'll take your question, is the ICC asked the Research and Accountability Department to run its reports. So we asked them, we want you to run a special ed report by school. We want you to show self-contained and resource. We want you to do it by ethnicity, by race, by grade, and then we want you to use the adverse impact ratio analysis, which is a real good formula to show if there is disparity. If there's a significant disparity between Anglo white kids and Hispanic kids or African American kids, it's a red flag. Then the district has to explain why there's such a significant statistical difference. Doesn't mean they're discriminating, but it could mean that. They would not do it. They would not run the numbers for us. Now, they own all this equipment. They have all these programmers. And I wanted to know how much of my DSEG dollars that taxpayers are paying for is purchasing this equipment, paying their salaries, and why can't we get them to do this work? Well, we couldn't waste time arguing with them because remember we were going to be arguing about unitary status and we had to submit our report. So 5 of us on the Independent Citizens Committee got $5 calculators and we did the adverse impact ratio analysis on all of the entire district. And I didn't bring that report with me. It's about this thick. And remember, I kept telling you, remember the ICC. Because that report made all the difference in the world. And if we hadn't taken the trouble with those calculators, we wouldn't have shown it. But back to answer your question, it needs to be pretty itemized. You need to know where those dollars are going.
But sort of what Crystal was saying before, it's in the interest of the district in terms of getting income for the district, not to improve things. not to show that there's any improvement in that adverse ratio, for example. Because if there is, then they can't appeal for the funds.
No, even after the district goes unitary status, they keep the money.
I mean, they keep it at that level?
They can freeze it at that level. They can freeze it at $63 million. But the secret is it should still be held accountable. And the only way, once it goes unitary again, and that will happen, the only way that kind of accountability is going to happen is through community.
The 63 million is my question. That's from 2001, 2002. Is that when that money stopped, or is there a 10-year later?
It's every year.
But it's still 63 million? So it hasn't gone up in 10 years?
Because it was becoming politically incorrect to keep increasing it and increasing. So they went ahead and froze it at that level.
They only milk the cows as much as they could.
Yeah.
Well, didn't they cap the business? Isn't what was happening? I think that the residential tax payers were at their maximum by statute. And so as it went up, it all was coming from businesses. And I think the legislature just said, enough. You know, you just can't do this. And I think they capped that.
There was a movement to take the DSEG dollars away. And rather than take them away, they tweaked the law and they capped it because businesses were the ones that were getting impacted the most. Is there another question over here?
Yeah, I'm just curious, kind of shift possibly the conversation, around 2006 and 2007, I think a slide before that. What was the role, if any, of Tom Horn with all this?
Tom Horn wasn't around back then. And you know, up until Tom Horn, our school superintendent really had not in any way gotten involved in any DSEG issue at all. Up until Moss, I can't recall a superintendent ever focusing on any one issue to that magnitude, ever. And I've lived here all my life. Okay, so in 2007, 2008, the judge says, unitary, okay, we're going to put this committee together. Fisher, Mendoza, TUSD, we're going to lock you up in a room and you're going to write a post-unitary status plan. And what we wanted, what Mendoza wanted, was we don't want any attorneys involved. And the reason we didn't want any attorneys involved, simply because we felt that it should be educators, the plaintiffs who had the interest of the students at hand from 1978 forward, and some level of research. We did not particularly want attorneys negotiating what was going to be happening to kids, which has happened since 1978. Many of the decisions in TUSD about desegregation are made by the legal department, not by educators. It's not a good way to run a school district. So in 2008, we start doing the plan, we finish it. 2009, the court approves the plan. I did bring the appendices, but this is the plan. And what's in this plan that is cherishable? Mexican-American studies. And, you know, when I was sitting at the table, I thought, well, we don't really need to put it in. You know, it's doing so well. There's no real reason to put it in. And then a couple of people pulled my hair and said, Campoy, you gotta put it in there. You can't take anything for granted. So it's in here. It's in here. And all the indicators that we talked about, they're addressed in this little plan. Okay, this plan from 2009 till now, and right now, this is the plan that's in place. The district has done, I'll give you a guess, everyone can inquire in. How much have they done to implement the plan? Zero. Zero.
you tell us some other parts of the plan that they could have implemented that they have not?
Okay, we are very aware of the fact that GATE is not ethnically or racially balanced. There's specific actions that were supposed to have taken place, did not take place. Advanced placement, there's disparity. Specific actions were supposed to take place. They did not take place. Special ed overrepresentation. Specific actions were supposed to take place. They did not take place. Discipline. Specific actions were supposed to take place. I could keep going.
So all the
things did not happen. And I sat in meetings with the superintendent and his cabinet and the superintendent, current superintendent, as much admitted. Nothing's been done on this plan. Now, I'm not sure you would say that today, because now we're under a deseg order again. Now, remember, we're not talking about words on a page. We're talking about kids that come to school with their bright eyes. And then what happens? We appealed. And Fisher also appealed. And we won. And when we won, the Ninth Circuit, of course, let the district court know that the unitary status was repealed and remanded, and he, within a short period of time, said that he would, the district judge decided he would appoint a special master. And there was a very lengthy process in doing that. So the special master was appointed on January 5th, 2012, an important date. Within a very short period of time after the special master is appointed, he tells the plaintiffs, he tells the judge, the district has not been in compliance with the post-unitary status plan. Five days after the special master is appointed, Moss is dismounted. And Maldiff files motions to reinstate it twice, and twice we are told no. But the door is left open. The door is left open. And what the judge says is we will leave that decision up to the special master, because a unitary status plan is being written. It may very well be part of the unitary status plan.
So I have a question. So is the new unitary status plan still being written by the plaintiffs, or is it now being written by the special master?
Okay, I'm on eggshells now.
Okay.
I think it's okay to say that all the parties, let me remind you who the parties are. All the parties are involved in writing the unitary status plan. Mendoza, Fisher, so those are the plaintiffs. TUSD, the guilty party. The defendant, the guilty party. And the Department of Justice. So there are 4 parties at the table in this process. Here's the timeline. And here's something very important. So on July 13th, the special master sent out a release of initial unitary status. So we all got that. On September 21st, the parties and the special master shall file the initial unitary status plan. And then, at the same time, objections. So if Mendoza doesn't like what Fisher is saying, or if Department of Justice doesn't like what TUSD is saying, all the objections go in at the same time.
So TUSD got this on July 13th, is that what you're saying? They know what this is? All those people who are claiming they don't know what's going on, they do know what's going on.
Well, I don't know everyone.
So it was
And
some of those.
remember, no one can talk about it. No TUSD, DOJ, Sylvia Campoy, nobody can talk about it. And if any of us talk about it and it's discovered we've talked about it, I don't think this judge is going to be very happy. So part of what may be going on is they just can't talk about it.
But Sylvia, I think what's missing in there between July 13th and September 21st by Judge Burry's order, so I'm not going to ask you to go beyond his order. He's ordering all four parties to spend 2 days sitting down negotiating. And I think that, the way I read that, it means, then they're supposed to put in the plan whatever it is they can all agree on.
Right.
So I think one thing that people don't understand, they think, Judge Hawley's, or Special Master Hawley, is going to just tell everybody what's going to be in the plan. This is a consensus, and TUSD has a vote, Mendoza has a vote, the United States has a vote, Fisher has a vote, right?
I wish it was as pretty as that.
How's it going to look?
If it's deja vu of what it was like to come up with a post-unitary status plan, it's pretty ugly. It's, politicians say that there's nothing uglier than making a law. It's like making a sausage. Nobody wants to see that happen. It's not a real positive process. I'm going in with an open mind, and I'm hoping that it's going to be wonderful. But people have already assumed positions. So I can only tell you that there's going to be 2 days of time together, and then we don't know what's going to happen from that point forward.
So at our first encuentro, we're actually preparing for this. Because the special master plan was actually supposed to come out on July 13th. And we were organizing a community to have these huge forums in August that were going to take place. And all of a sudden, lo and behold, it got delayed all of a sudden. But we were also celebrating a little victory. Wasn't there like 2 weeks or so before that, Judge Burry ruled that Tom Horn can no longer interfere in TUSD?
Intervene.
Right. And then I'm looking at the October 5th, the Amaka brief. How does that compare with that Conform with that Judge Burry?
Well, by October 5th, what the judge has said is that they may file objections, but only to anything involving Moss, because that's his only interest. That's what he has to intervene on. And so if he finds something objectionable in the drafted plan relative to Moss, then he can object to it. That's all that means.
Sylvia, those four
Parties?
You are representing Mendoza.
I will be at the table. Nancy Ramirez will be at the table. Lois Thompson will be at the table. And Beatriz Arias will be at the table. So God forbid anything happened to one of us, there's 4 of us there. And all of us are in the same place.
And from the TUSD, is it fair to say they're the lawyers and not educators?
Probably the attorneys. I'm second guessing. I have no idea who will be there.
Board members and lawyers?
Yeah, I have no idea though.
Wouldn't this almost be an exploitation of our children? I mean, there was money, millions and millions of dollars off of our children. Has anybody, what is the consequence for that?
Well, quite frankly, there has not been a lot of consequence. And the only thing that we can do, since we're back under a court order, is make sure that there is accountability. And I think I said earlier, there is some good news. The special master has made it very, very clear that the DSEG dollars will be monitored. That every single dollar that's going to be expended into desegregation will be approved through a very rigorous process. So it ain't easy money like it used to be. Can't do anything about what has been. All we can do is take it from this point forward. I think I saw a question. Mari?
What's interesting, when you look at the timeline that you have here, which is great, Sylvia, it's wonderful, is that I think about the last meeting, the last TUSD meeting, when you were talking about remind me, my brain is a little bit off today, but the what's the thing that we're going to be doing to consolidate the schools? What's the
Yeah, the
school
budget
closures? Yes. So if you look at that and compare it to that timeline, it's just interesting because, you know, we're going to be going into public meetings or town halls, you know, now we can have room for everybody in a big, huge town hall meeting, it's great. So town halls in August and October, and supposedly the special master is going to be looking at this all along and been part of it, and you know, that they made that very clear in front of the board. How does that fit into all of this stuff?
Well, let me give you my perspective. Okay, now I'm just talking, I have not checked off with my plaintiffs, I have not checked off with the attorneys, this is me talking. I would want every single person, as we're looking at school closures, and I wouldn't start there. I would not start with school closures. That's a horrible, horrible place to divide a community. But if they're going to do it, then what people need to ask for is what's the ethnic racial composition of the school that you're trying to close down. And if it's one of the schools that's ethnically balanced, and I bet you a whole lot of the schools that are on the chopping block are ethnically balanced, then that school shouldn't be closed down. Remember Catalina High School. Remember Catalina High School. That happened for a reason. It taught us a lesson, and that lesson should be long-lived. If there are school closures, it should not be disruptive to the desegregation process. It certainly should not segregate our school district any more than it is right now. Has any type of analysis been done to show the impact of the schools that are on the chopping block and where those schools, those kids are going to be diverted to? What kind of impact is it going to have racially or ethnically? Those are questions that have to be asked, and I'm not sure those have been asked, much less answered.
I noticed that one of the criteria was about transportation. And so I wonder if when the district went to an open enrollment system, which allows supposed school choice if you have transportation, isn't that another segregating factor? Because who doesn't have transportation? Certainly socioeconomically, you're not offering everybody a choice of which school to go to. You're only offering people who have their own transportation that choice.
And a good unitary status plan would have not only magnet schools, would probably have a good student assignment plan. And I can't say anything more than that.
Good question back here.
I'm sorry, let's go there. Yeah.
I have a question. I would just like to say something about race in the Ames test. I'm going to 6th grade. I'm 11, and every year when I take the Ames test, at the top of the sheet, I always have to put in my race. It's a requirement.
Yeah. And I'm a real stickler about this, so let me diverge just for, give me 1 minute. There is a difference between ethnicity and race. Okay. And we're still having to remind district officials that there is a difference between ethnicity and race. And when we talk, and that's why I've made it a point tonight to every time talk about race and ethnicity. Because there is segregation in our district right now by ethnicity, not by race. To some degree, there is by race because there are white isolated schools on the far right side of far of the map. Thank you, Corey. On the far east side of Tucson. So there are some racially isolated schools. The majority of our schools that are isolated are ethnically isolated. They are heavily, heavily populated by Latino kids. There are no Asian isolated schools, unless you consider University High, and I'm being funny. There are no schools that are racially isolated by African Americans. There are a few schools where you have a concentration of Native American kids, but the isolation is predominantly Latino schools.
Can I ask real quick about the Department of Justice and their role, and why would, how did they come to be part of?
They were interveners in the case in 1975. They joined the case pretty early on. And so actually, Department of Justice has been at the table from the very, very beginning. They're not always very visible. They are a very visible presence right now.
And the Department of Education, are they involved at all?
The Department of Education has been involved and has been instrumental because of all of the Office for Civil Rights complaints that were filed. Part of the reason that special ed was not a really, really big issue in the 1978 stipulation was because there was an OCR complaint and corrective action plan that was dealing with that, and there was a corrective action plan dealing with English language learners. Those things should have been corrected long-term, but they were corrected, and then the sins were repeated. So the correction was not long-standing.
And just one more thing, the special master, is he or she?
He, Dr. Willis Hawley.
Is he local? Is he
No,
a local person?
he's from back east, and he is not local.
And what is his name again?
Willis Hawley, Hawley. Okay, anything else on the timeline?
Yeah, Sylvia, I think you may have provided the answer right now as to why they've been hiding all this time. You see, this idea about race and ethnicity, those are concepts from the 1950s. Class apart, that was amended, wasn't it? Or the 40s?
40s.
Going back to the 40s. I think in today's parlance, even in the legal realm, the concept of racial profiling, et cetera, does recognize Latinos as a racial minority. Meaning, in this society, to discriminate by ethnicity is like nothing. And we see the results. Now, if you discriminate by race, that is a federal case. And so I think you're providing the answer. Now, whether anything can be done about it in this case, I'm not so sure. But I think politically, that's where we have to go because, again, there's no sense of urgency. You can see that. 29 years we just showed it, plus a few more, right? So that's just more of an editorial commentary because I don't think nothing will change in this case about that. Correct?
Well, if I didn't think things could change, I'd be home right now watching Master Theater. I really believe things are going to change, and I'll tell you why. This community is up and alarmed and bright-eyed and is not going to go away. It's not going to go away. What's happened with Moss has infuriated people, and not everyone is here. Not everyone is at forums, but people are talking about this every single place I go. It doesn't matter where I go. It doesn't matter whether it's a social gathering in the grocery store, at the doctor's office. People know, and people tell me over and over again, what they did with Moss is wrong.
Yeah, Sylvia, no, I wasn't disagreeing about that. Obviously, I mean, we've been here, what, now 6 years. And like we always tell her, we're not going to go away. So I was referring to the specifics about race and ethnicity, about how that works with the census, all that stuff. I've studied that for 30 years, and I know how that works. I was just referring to, again, that aspect's not going to change.
Yeah.
But our urgency, absolutely, I mean, we're here.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that drives me nuts is you'll see on TUSD forms, if you see it as a parent, make them change it. Anglo is not a racial identifier. Okay, there are a lot of people that are Euro-American that are not Anglo. They're French. They're Italian. They're not Anglo. So when you refer to kids in the district and one category is Anglo and you're including in there kids that have heritage other than Anglo, you confuse matters. So that's one thing that drives me crazy. The other thing is the whole issue with how they identify whether it's Hispanics, Latinos, Mexican Americans, and what race they categorize us in. And if they don't have it straight, then how do you think they're going to track things? So one thing that we've been pretty insistent on is that those identifiers, number one, have to be up to the parents. The parents decide that. And number two, they have to be correct. At least use the same terminology every single time and make it consistent with what we're reporting to the court. So.
Let me interrupt. We have about 5 minutes to be sensitive to Sylvia's time. So just to keep that in mind as we answer these last two questions.
Why don't I finish that, and then I'm willing to stay around for as long as anybody wants to ask questions.
You'll be sorry you said that.
All right, so you saw the timeline, and what I want you to really walk away with tonight is that your input for that time period of public comment is critical. Your input is valuable. It's necessary. It's being solicited. Get your neighbors, get your sisters, your brothers, your uncles. We have got to make our statements during the comment period. This is critical. So just go back to that timeline.
When will we know those dates?
It's October 10th through 12th,
yeah,
right?
10th through the 12th.
And what will those forums look like? Will we be looking at the plan and making comments on it?
The plan will be on the website, and it will be at every TUSD school. Anything more than that, I don't know.
Starting when?
10th through the 12th.
Of October?
Yeah, October 10th through 12th is what it says. But is that actually when they roll it out?
It comes out in September. Didn't you say the plan will be out in September?
21st.
And then comments in October.
So I don't know what that process looks like.
Oh,
All I
but
know
after
is
the
that it will
21st.
be critical to comment on it. The last slide said never to be silenced. And I want to stress that. I think people empower one another, issues empower. I think that there's a connection now. You know, people are here from Michigan, from California, from all over the United States. People are watching us. International friends I know are watching us because I've gotten emails from friends in Europe and in the Middle East saying, "What are you doing in Tucson?" So we are being watched. And I think that's a very, very powerful thing. So go ahead.
It was my understanding that ethnic studies was one of the suggestions of the judge prior to Judge Rainey for the Flores case that has morphed from one thing into another over a period of 20 years. That keeps getting won by Flores, but the winning gets ignored by the state. That one of the suggestions, and I don't know if it was Judge Marcus or the one before him, but one suggestion as a remedy was ethnic studies.
Well, ethnic studies was definitely something that was created, and let's be real specific, Mexican American studies, the foundation of its creation was the desegregation order. It was to narrow or eliminate disparity between Latino kids and their non-minority counterparts. That was the basis for the creation of Mexican American studies.
So it had nothing to do with the Flores.
I don't know if there was some connection, since there are many, many connections, but I don't know what that connection might have been.
So why did the school board use that for Trump 23?
You know, Crystal,
Doesn't the legal counsel, the TUSD legal counsel said what I heard board members say is legal counsel. I don't understand the legality of that counsel, but if this wouldn't trump state law.
It could have, and in my viewpoint, it should have, and it didn't. And so I think that tells you a lot right there. You know, I think a lot of agendas have been revealed over the course of the last several years. And I hope the community realizes that when they vote. Any other questions? Kathleen?
I do have one. I've been watching this issue from afar, even though at one time I was in the middle of working in all of this. But my question is, and it's one that's asking you to answer candidly, and that is, it seems to me the district is already moving forward with what they want to do, absent disagreement, absent the four parties coming together. I appreciate your optimism, but it seems to me like they've already got a plan and they intend to implement it, and they've already started implementing it, and the rest of this is sort of a facade. And so your candor would be appreciated.
Well, knowing their history, knowing TUSD's history, that doesn't surprise me. I don't know how much implementation is going on here or there, but the district's history has often been to throw an idea out and to believe that as the guilty party, that is the only idea that needs to be listened to, attended to, and implemented, and so they get going before the other parties agree. So that doesn't shock me at all. Here's the difference. The difference is that there is a special master who has to listen to the parties. TUSD does not have to listen to the parties. They may pretend to, they haven't. That's real clear to me. The special master is obligated under his responsibility to get feedback, get input, work with Department of Justice and the plaintiffs. So if that's the case, the brakes can be put on. Or if that's the case and it's a good way to go and the parties agree to it, then it may need to be fleshed out. But it doesn't surprise me at all that on many of the initiatives that maybe have been thrown out, that they've already started work on it.
Well, even with the closures of the schools at the last board meeting, they said there was going to be focus groups open up to community members, but they get to choose who the community members are. And I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, that's already a problem. The board is going to choose people to be in the focus groups, and those focus groups are the ones that make the decision. But we're all invited to hear what the final result is.
My recommendation is that you do what other people in the community do, that load those committees up. You write a letter to the governing board and to the superintendent.
You want to be a part of the focus.
That you want to be part of it, that here are your qualifications, that you're a parent, that you're a taxpayer, and that you want to be involved. And if you're not selected, you'd like to know why.
So 2 questions, or a comment. There are also town hall meetings, and it's up to us to make those town hall meetings into something other than being offered to arrange the chairs on the deck of the Titanic. That's what they are going to want us to do. And we need to say, nope, we're not going to choose between your options, you're going to listen to our options. So be thinking about them. But my question is maybe the same as one that I heard before. So they're patting themselves on the back for getting to this 2013-14 budget crisis so early. Are they getting to it so early so that we will all be too busy looking at that bouncing ball to look at this bouncing ball?
It could be a distractor. And again, closure of schools is a horrible place to start to balance the budget. It divides communities, it divides neighborhoods, it upsets kids. So if it's unnecessary, if we're going through this exercise and it's unnecessary, that's a horrible thing. There should be a connection between what they're doing with proposed school closures and the desegregation order, you would think. Yet, the parties have not been involved in any of those discussions.
Sylvia, I don't think you can answer this question, but regarding, no, it's not about, I know you. Regarding the October 10th to 12th, you don't know how it's going to be. But are there people in this group that are going to organize a public meeting so that we can come out with something? Anybody?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great thing for Tucson Freedom Summer to continue itself on with, no?
Yes. You had mentioned at one point that things that have been done can't be undone, and I was thinking about the cameras that they put onto school buses. I guess I have a couple questions about that, and just one basically is, are disparities in discipline still at issue? Are they still being taken into account? Is that still a question for desegregation?
They are still.
Okay, and I guess my other question is, and then whatever, but are socioeconomic disparities also being taken into account? Like you said, segregation can happen in different ways. Is that part of what's being looked at in disparities in discipline?
I can't answer that.
Okay.
What I can answer is that in looking at any desegregation plan today, socioeconomic status is certainly something that should be looked at, if nowhere else, in discipline. All the research shows that the poorer a kid is, the more discipline they get. So discipline is executed based on largely not only race and ethnicity, but socioeconomic status. So that should be something that's looked at. And by saying you can't undo the past, I was really talking about the dollars that have been expended.
Right.
All those other indicators can be corrected. We cannot undo the spending. It's been spent. That money is gone. There's no accountability for it. But all those other indicators can be dealt with and be corrected.
I was going to add, one of the importance of the community is that if you think about it, TUSD is a guilty party in all this, and they're the ones that have to kind of fix it, which is kind of a conflict. They're the ones going to be organizing these forums and so on, and you're kind of like trusting Petitcone and Stegeman and all them that are already guilty of racism and segregation to fix the segregation. Well, that's what happens if you don't get involved. Okay, that's why we need to have this whole fall needs to be packed here at 10:10 every board meeting, and when they have these forums, and everyone really has to get there, because it doesn't just impact the schools. If you close down Ochoa or something, it impacts the neighborhood. After school, free lunch, all this stuff, property values. So it's this is a turning point in Tucson. It really is. And the future of Tucson is going to look back on 2012 at what we did this year. So just keep showing up and keep bringing more people.
I just want to piggyback on what Amy said. I know that I depend on him to remind me when these things are coming up. And maybe, I don't know if anybody else, most people here follow Amy on Facebook, but that's where I get my reminders. I don't know where anybody else, if you're not following him, is there somewhere else that they can go to? Well, I mean, that's what I'm saying. You want to be reminded if you're not.
Tucson Freedom Summer.
Yeah. No, for school board meetings, you're saying though, because you can go to the webpage.
Yes.
For that.
Things outside of the first Tuesday of every month, like the forums, where they're going to be, the times, because I know I'm getting forgetful, and if I'm not reminded by his post, I might, the next day, oh, I forgot, that was yesterday. So, what would be a good resource? Tucson Freedom Summer is a good place, Tucson North is a good place. So if anybody is questioning on how they keep up with when these things are happening, you may want to use those two resources.
Any other questions on desegregation?
My name is Rob. I'm with this is Marcus. We're with the component that's called community relations.
Very important, you guys.
So we're not investigators, we're not enforcement. We're an agency created by the Civil Rights Act to do conflict resolution. But we've been in communication with the special master. So our involvement will be to help with the process of these forums and the notices and things like that. And we had meetings earlier today. I read 3 Sonorans all the time. But there is a process going on where we don't, our agency doesn't decide how the forums are, but we can play a role in making sure what people's concerns about comments, having access, which translations, those things have all been great. But there's a process going on, and we had a meeting today that's ongoing, but I'll give you my part of that.
Okay, great. Anything else? I want to thank you very, very much.